Jane Hume is a superannuation minister. She joins me live now. Thanks so much for your time, Jane.
Good to be with you, Laura.
What do you think the Prime Minister was trying to achieve yesterday?
Well, I think he feels that he has been misunderstood and misrepresented throughout this. You know, he is he's a good and natural supporter of women, which I think he tried to make clear yesterday morning. Unfortunately, I think the media interview went awry and he misstepped, and he said as much. It's a big deal for a politician to come out and say, I was wrong, and apologise, which is what he did.
Yeah, so has his broader message in all this been lost?
I hope not, because it is a seismic shift that we're seeing, not just in Parliament House, but I think right around the country. And it's a really important one that we need to make. You know, women's voices are important and they are powerful and they're being heard. That's got to be a good thing. Now the trick is to get to, to grasp the moment and take that big, that next big step towards genuine culture change.
Yeah, he said he's heard and he's listened, but I guess people want to see words moved into action, and this is a moment. I don't think we can miss this moment. So what do we want?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that we saw that yesterday. Certainly my staff went to a meeting with the Prime Minister yesterday where he made it very clear that he wanted them to feel safe, that he wanted them to feel welcome, that he wanted to see more women in Parliament, not just in parliamentary roles, but also in staff roles as well, that their voices were really important, that they should be heard, and that the contribution that they make is invaluable.
So what do you think the steps are to actually achieving that? Let's talk about quotas.
Well, I know that seems to be the topic du jour, and quotas do go a long way to changing numbers, certainly, particularly when we look at the number of female parliamentarians. The question though is, do they go all the way to change the culture? There's so much more I think that we can do to get both women into Parliament, but also into senior positions, whether it be political positions or in business as well.
What? Let's
and that's
look at
part of that
because
conversation.
if quotas aren't the answer, what is? Because what we've got at the moment, the status quo doesn't seem to be working all that well.
I think that there is a real opportunity to do some talent identification and development. Women aren't necessarily as good at putting themselves out there, particularly for senior positions. So how do we get the women that are here, and indeed the men that are here, to identify that next generation of female talent coming through and to nurture them? And I'm not just talking about mentoring programs. Anybody can do a mentoring program, but you really need to get that sponsorship, put that skin in the game, make that investment in that next generation of women coming forward, and say, I vouch for her. That's really powerful, and that's what really takes women to the next step. It certainly worked with things like the ASX, the number of women on boards. When you get chairs of boards, particularly of those large boards, invested in that next generation of women coming through, the numbers change dramatically.
Absolutely, but the profit changes dramatically. The evidence shows, the data shows that if you have more women on boards at ASX companies, well, the profits are bigger. It's a no-brainer.
Well, that's exactly right. It's actually called the wisdom of crowds, which is, the more diverse voices around a decision-making table, the better decisions that they make. From a government perspective, the better decisions that are made, the better policy, the better politics. It works for everyone. So there is, a business case to say that more women should be seated at the tables where decisions are made, whether it be in politics or whether it be in business.
Yeah. But the frustrating thing is, Jane, here, and I'm sure you feel it, is that we've heard this before. But we are now at a point where it's too slow. It's just not achieving. What you say is not achieving what is actually required in Parliament House. So how do we get there quickly? Because I think, the patience has run out.
Well, that's really it. Quotas get you there quickly in terms of numbers, but what gets you there quickly in terms of changes of culture? And I think that there is more that can be done in that regard, and it comes from the top, but it's also a grassroots thing as well. We want to see that seismic shift happen in society and happen in business as well as happen in politics. It can't just be a top-down thing, it's got to be bottom-up as well.
Okay, so let's talk about policy here, and not just for the women in Parliament House that work in politics, but what is going to change things for women every day? What is one thing, one policy shift that you think will really move the needle?
Yeah, I think the most important thing we can do is get more women into the workforce, get that participation rate up. Now, we were at the pre-COVID at record levels of participation rate in the workforce, women. That's been a great thing. We know that women are working far more years of their lives now than they were 30 years ago. That's also a great thing. The gender pay gap has come down from around 17% to around 13.5%. But there's still 13.5% there, and that's really got to be tackled next. Participation rate goes up, gender pay gap comes down, and we find that pay gap.
How do you get participation?
Gap.
How do you get that participation? Are you talking about things like better paid parental leave, looking at childcare, closing that, which is right in your wheelhouse, the superannuation gap?
Yeah, the superannuation gap is a very important one, I think, and was one that was raised by the Retirement Income Review. You know, it said that there are some structural features of the superannuation system that disproportionately affect, women compared to men, and they should be addressed as matters of equity, not necessarily though as matters of adequacy. The adequacy issue is a different one in itself. In fact, if you raise the super guarantee, you actually widen the gender super gap. So we have to do things to make sure that that gap is narrowed. The big trick is participation and gender pay gap.
We heard from Karen Andrews just yesterday, and she has talked about the culture there at Parliament House. If you're not part of the drinking culture, you really don't fit in. Have you felt that too?
Look, I mean, there's always pockets of activity around Parliament House, different groups getting together to discuss different issues. I don't actually sense that there is a drinking culture here, but we, as you know, Laura, we work very late into the night. We often have dinner together as either as colleagues or with staff, and inevitably, if it's that late at night, someone might pull out a bottle of wine to have with dinner. Yeah. I've actually found the camaraderie that I share, not with just my female colleagues, but with my male colleagues as well in this place to be invaluable. I also think that the relationship I have with my staff is really, really important. So, look, there is a very unique culture in this building. There is no doubt about it. Is it toxic? No, that's not what I've experienced at all. In fact, I had a new staff member, a young woman, start with me just this week, and I felt like I needed to go out to her beforehand and say, hey, I promise you it's not as bad as it's been made out on the television or in the media. And I think that, walking into this building, she's realised exactly that. Yeah. It's actually quite a supportive workplace as long as it's handled well.
A lot of people would be thinking, Jane, why do you do it this morning?
Because it's important. Because it's important that women have voices around that table. And we go back to that original conversation. Because if you're tough enough to do it, you should step up and do it. I think that that's part of our civic duty. But more importantly, it's because that's where good decisions get made.
Jane Hume, thanks so much for your time.
Great to be with you, Laura.